Hi, it's Annie Grace, author of This Naked Mind, and I am answering readers' questions. Today I have a question from Bill. He says, I had a question about pot edibles. My wife and I are both doing the alcohol challenge. I'm on day 17, awesome. Alcohol-free for 18 days, congratulations. And she is on day 8. We have 3 small girls, 5-year-old and 3-year-old twins, so we are very busy. Yes, it sounds like it. We live in a state where pot is legal, so I'm not looking for a moral argument about pot. My wife, even though she's been watching the videos, still says she needs a stress relief from the girls by 4 p.m. because she stays home with them all day. Last night, she stopped at a pot shop and bought some edible gummy bears. She said she needs it to relieve her stress and anxiety. She's been working on anxiety with her doctor. I have thought about pot edibles too, so I'm wondering what your thoughts are on it. I know there's less research on pot, but I'm still trying to figure out if pot would be okay to replace alcohol. Is that a bad idea? Is it harmless? Is it a slippery slope? Is it an acceptable form of stress release? I've looked through the Facebook page. I haven't seen anyone ask the question, so I thought I'd ask. I'm doing fine with the alcohol experiment, and I honestly don't think I'll ever drink again. It's only 18 days. I don't want to jinx it, but I'm very excited. That's awesome. That's so good. So marijuana. Yeah, it's a great question. I also live in a state where marijuana is legal, so it is funny that I haven't actually answered this question before. But what I want to do is I want to report facts and I want to share my own experience. And so the facts are that there is much less research on marijuana. It is much harder to find stuff, and that's because it's been classified as like a restricted substance, so there hasn't been a lot of research. That is starting to change, and so they're actually starting to research marijuana in things like, obviously there's been medical marijuana for epilepsy. There's been confirmed cases that marijuana has actually eliminated cancer, which is pretty cool. You can read about that on cancer.gov. There's something about marijuana. So there's lots of different things. And then there's a whole other avenue too of non-THC marijuana, so CBD oil. So that's where they actually take the psychoactive THC part out of the marijuana, so you're not getting impaired psychologically. So there's no high, but it's been reported as like an incredible stress reliever, an incredible pain reliever, and that's actually legal in all states. And so you can look into that. You obviously want to make sure that you're getting something that is really good quality. And I don't know any personally to refer you to, but with anything that is, a big craze, you can get stuff that's just nasty and not actually effective. So anyway, CBD is definitely an interesting thing. And there's been all the research that I've seen on CBD has been wholly positive. Again, there's not a ton, and it's a lot of people self-reporting on their experience with CBD oil about anxiety and about relaxation and stuff like that. And the great thing about that is it doesn't impair you mentally. And I could not find anything on CBD being addictive. It's hard to find stuff on marijuana actually being addictive. So let me share with you what I did find. First of all, marijuana works on a very different part of the brain than other addictive drugs. So it works on what's called the endocannabinoid system, and that's actually a naturally occurring system in the brain. And so when other drugs are artificially stimulating certain parts of your pleasure center, marijuana is working kind of on a different system. The best person with the most research on this that I've seen is Professor Thad A. Polk from the University of Michigan, and he did something called the addictive brain. And he talks about every substance that's very addicted to us, from porn and gambling to video games, alcohol, cocaine, heroin, opiates, and marijuana. And so that's a very, very good resource on how it works differently. It definitely is a very different mechanism in the brain with marijuana than it is with anything else. And I don't know enough about it to kind of parrot it back, but if you're looking to dig deeper, you can get the Addictive Brain on Audible. I believe it's like $15 and like hugely worth it just for your own knowledge. What I did find is that one of the main ways that they rate toxicology and harmfulness, riskiness of a drug is called the MO approach, margin of exposure. And so according to the margin of exposure approach, which is like very much accepted as a very good benchmark because it's taking into account both intake, so the amount that somebody's using of the drug, and how toxic it is. So sometimes people just take in how toxic something is. By the way, on every benchmark that I've seen that's evaluating the toxicity of drugs and the harmfulness of drugs, alcohol always scores at the top. So that's just a side note. And I mean, from a personal perspective, I certainly feel like if you were going to substitute something that's the most toxic and the most harmful and kills the most people of any drug with something that's never actually been known to kill anybody, like that's a pretty much a no-brainer just from a purely numerical based, thing. However, substituting for anything, I think needs a little more conversation and explanation. So I'm going to come back to that and share my own experience because it's profound and I do have experience with marijuana. But first, let's talk about this MO, the margin of exposure approach. So again, it's the ratio between intake, so how much somebody's using it, and toxicology, how toxic it is. And if you get a score of less than 10, that means it's high risk. So the drugs that scored less than 10 with the MO approach are cocaine, alcohol, nicotine, and heroin. When you took population into account, alcohol was the only drug that scored less than 10. When you get from 10 to 100, that's a risk category. That means there is risk associated with the drug. In 10 to 100, that's where every other drug fell, both pharmaceutical, narcotics and illegal drugs, with the exception of cannabis. And cannabis had a MO score of more than 10,000. So purely from that perspective, there's not been a confirmed overdose on marijuana. There hasn't been a confirmed death. So it's a very, very different conversation, I would say, than alcohol. And in terms of the idea of do no harm to other people, you definitely can drive impaired on marijuana and it's dangerous. So driving high is super dangerous and your faculties are impaired. So I want to throw that out there. But equally, in terms of actually doing harm to yourself and to your body, it does seem like it's much less toxic. Caveat that to say that the research done on it is, again, much less. So the biggest concern, though, that has come up in my research about marijuana is for younger brains that are still developing. It can be a really, really, really big problem for younger brains because they haven't yet developed and it can actually arrest development in certain parts of the brain. So for a teenager, hopefully a teenager is not doing either one, but we all know that that's not true. But for somebody whose brain is developing, smoking a lot of pot is going to be a bad choice. So from my experience, I grew up in Aspen, Colorado. I know tons and tons of people that use marijuana without a problem, have their entire lives, and it doesn't affect, them at all. From an external perspective, they use it, recreationally, maybe even once or twice a day, but it's not kind of day until dusk. So I had a very low, it's actually funny with alcohol and marijuana. I didn't have very much of a cautionary upbringing at all. With alcohol, my parents didn't drink, so there wasn't really much caution with alcohol. I didn't feel like, oh gosh, I never want to follow, go where they're going. With marijuana, it was definitely the same. I didn't have a lot of caution. So when I realized that alcohol was a problem for me, and it was during the years that I was really trying to moderate and cut back and wasn't successful. During those years was the first year that that marijuana became legal in Colorado. And I had a big kind of just mental hang up with doing something that was illegal. So I didn't smoke until, aside from the occasional smoking here and there in high school, like everybody does, but I didn't smoke as an adult until it became legal in the state. And then, you could go get a medical marijuana license, especially for anxiety and depression, which I was dealing with. And I said, okay, well, this has got to be a better solution than alcohol. And so for about 2 years, I was kind of using it really in addition to, but also drinking much less because of marijuana. It was really, really helpful for me at the time. However, when I started to use it more and more often, it became a problem for me. And I'll explain how it became a problem. I think it really crossed the threshold. Drinking was mostly social for me because it was out and social. And all of a sudden my life became really, really intense. I had I just had my second baby and he was young and my husband was working all hours of the day and I had just gotten a promotion to where I was traveling. I was in charge of 28 countries. So I was traveling twice a month internationally. I had a lot of mom guilt for leaving the babies behind. And when I would get home, all I wanted to do is, I called it obliviate. I just wanted to turn my brain off. And so I had this cocktail of, 2 or 3 drinks and then smoke a bowl and it would just like turn my brain off completely. And when I started to use it in that way to deal with pain, boom, I became addicted to marijuana. And I was equally as addicted as I was to alcohol. And I used them both together, and it was a very, very, very nasty place. And it was very similar to with drinking, where before I would know I'd be happier if I wouldn't smoke that day. The pleasure had worn off from it. I know I wanted to be more present. I know that as soon as I smoked between 10 and 40 minutes later, I'd be wanting to smoke again. And it was hurting my lungs, and it wasn't comfortable. And I'd be really just hating what I was doing with both drinking and smoking, like absolutely hating it, and really beating myself up about it, really being upset. But when I would try to abstain, and I made myself a rule, like I'm not going to smoke until 4:20 because I thought that was funny. But when I do that, the entire day, it would be like this itch, like I was just scratching, like I couldn't wait to do it. And I was just like crazy. It was totally cyclical and in my head, and all my thoughts were nuts about it. And it was just a nasty place to be. And so I'd smoke just to relieve that itch, often before 4:20. And then as soon as the itch was relieved, I would be like stoned. And I hated that feeling by this point in time. I just hated it. It was absolutely miserable because it was like I wasn't present anymore. It made what started out as like a fun social thing, and this was how it was for drinking too. It was fun and social. It seemed to loosen me up. All of a sudden, all I wanted to do was be alone and just put as much of these substances into my body as possible. And it isolated me from all of my friends. It was really rough on my marriage. It made me really distant from my kids. For me, it was a very, very, very slippery slope. Now, I think that everybody's experience is different. I can tell you it's been years since I've smoked, and that's where I found really true joy, is in learning to handle my emotions. But I will also say that it was a helpful thing to realize, how bad alcohol was for me, because it is like honesty juice. Like as soon as I would smoke, I would be like, wow, I can't believe how much I drink. I would admit things to myself about my drinking that I had not been able to admit to myself before I smoked, and I was just so raw and so honest. I journaled a lot during that time, and it wasn't all the journals that I turned into my book, but it was a lot of journals just about different things going on in my life and stuff. And so personal reflection. So I actually consider, in a very strange way, marijuana was a bit of a tool for me on my journey, but it was certainly not a tool that led me anywhere ultimately good. Although I do think it did play a part in the entire thing of freeing me from drinking ultimately, and from smoking. And so I don't believe that it is the evidence shows that it's certainly not as dangerous, and it's certainly not as toxic. And so I can't, none of my programs are ever going to be like here's the rule. I'm always just going to tell you the facts the most facts I can find, the most research I can find. And then I'm going to tell you my personal experience. And then you obviously be empowered to do more research and make your own decision. But that is it in a nutshell, and I hope that's helpful. And I think for me, I don't have the same gut feeling. I know my kids will end up drinking at some point, and that sucks. But I hope that they'll be really mindful, and I'll do my best to teach them about how dangerous and addictive it can be. I'm sure my kids will end up trying marijuana at some point, because that's just the world we live in these days, and hopefully not too many other things, but possibly other drugs. And it's the same thing. However, I don't have the same level of what is wrong with our culture. Why are we putting this on television and Super Bowl commercials? And why are we marketing it to our children? Because we're not doing that with marijuana. Now, I'm not saying that we might not in the future when it becomes a big business. And then I probably will be on a soapbox about it. But at this point in time, I definitely, feel much more passionately and stronger about how frustrating it is that my kids can't go a day without seeing, somebody drinking or a commercial on TV where somebody's drinking. So that's pretty frustrating. But anyway, I hope that helps. I'm sorry it's not more definitive, but thank you so much, Bill. It was a wonderful question, and have a great day.